And welcome. Thank you for joining us. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen. Amen.
Thank you. And here we are. So we are again working on Torah Temimah, and I'm going to tell you that this particular little section that we are looking at, I spent a lot of time trying to really figure out how it was working. And the truth is, I looked at the translation by Sharfstein, and it wasn't helping me, and looking at the dictionary to make sure I had translations correctly of this word ayel that we've got right here. Found it. It took a few tries. It's not under this particular, it's not like I could just look up Yale and find it. It's actually under a root of all. Do you see that here? And but I found it, etc. And I have to tell you that this morning, as I was getting ready to try and explain it, I looked one more time at the Sharfstein, and I think I now have it figured out just this morning before we started. So here goes. Baríshon, in the first. Now it says just in the first, באחד לחודש, in the first day of the month. And this is the key, is what is the Rishon referring to? It is referring to month. Notice uh, it doesn't say anything about the month. It just says in the first. And you have to understand that it's referring to the first month. Okay, and then that's what makes all the difference, right? So it's in the first month on the first day of the month. Okay. And it says, Mi da'akate, since Yom Echadhu, that it is one day, right? On one day, da'ayel, that it's bringing in, that it's mentioning is what this means here. In other words, since it's mentioning actually or referring to, right, the first day, Bachodesh, right? That it's the first day of the month, right? Or rather, it's the first day of this first month. The kakare lechodesh, but it never refers to this first day as the first month, right? It's saying in the first month, on the first of the month, but it's still referring to the first month. Shma Mina, we can learn out from this that Yom Echad Bachodesh, right? That that one day in a month, Chashiv Chodesh, is considered an entire month. Now, I knew this principle. I'm aware of it. And we'll see as it goes on. Umidiyom echad b'chodesh chashiv chodesh, and since one day of a month is considered an entire month, shloshim yom b'shana chashuv shana, 30 days of a year are considered an entire year. How do we mean this? How do we apply this? Well, Torah Temimah is going to tell us. But where I knew this from before is, for example, a part of a day, right, working sort of in the other direction, part of a day is considered a day. An hour of a day is considered an entire day. And so, for example, in counting Shiva, right? What's the first day of Shiva? Well, the first day of Shiva is the day of the funeral. You go back from the funeral in the middle of the day and you start your Shiva, and it counts as a complete day. Complete day. And when you end Shiva, you get up, you walk around the house, and presumably you daven shacharit, and then you walk around the house, and that's just a couple of hours in the morning, and that's considered your entire seventh day of Shiva. And that's what they're referring to here, is that it has halachic implications when you're counting days or months or weeks or years, that this particular statement allows you to understand that, right? Because it's still saying the first month, even though it actually was just one day that this was happening. Let's take a look at the at the Torah Temimah. And I have to honestly thank God to finally understand, or believe I understand properly, what this is referring to. So here we go. And we are able to have practical differences, practical distinctions, right? Or we learn out from this. Le'inyan cheshbon shnot orla urivai, regarding the counting of the years of orla. Orla is referring to the number of years when a fruit tree, the first, I believe, that it's the first 3 years, okay, when the tree gives fruit, and you're not allowed to eat the fruit of that tree. You have to leave it alone, right? And Revai would be the 4th year, okay? Ulufi, and so how do you count these years? When do you start counting the years? Do you count it actually from the actual first of the year? Or, as we see, we just celebrated Tu B'Shvat, and that's the new year of the trees and the significance of the tree. And we're going to keep going, and you'll see now how a month counts as an entire year. Let's take a look. Ulafima de Kayan Malan. And he's going to something else now. And since we have, right, accepted Kaimalan, Be'echad B'Tishrei, that on the first of Tishrei, Rosh Hashanah Orla U'Lerevai, right? So this isn't the new year of this, even though it's referring to trees, it's referring to something else here, okay? But we are referring to trees, right? We're talking about those years of Orla and the year towards Revai. Umonin lahin misha'at neti'ah, and since you count from the time of planting, ein monim Rosh Hashanah Rosh Hashanah. In other words, you certainly shouldn't be planting on Rosh Hashanah, right? It's work, right? But we don't count in terms of those years from Rosh Hashanah to the next. Ela shloshim yom b'shana chashuv shana. But we just read that 30 days of a year are considered an entire year. So what are we saying? We're saying that if you planted that tree 30 days or more before Rosh Hashanah, which is permissible, right? Under normal circumstances, it might be well considered permissible, as long as it's not Shabbos, you know what I mean, right? It counts as 1 year towards the Revai and the Orla. V'yitba'er im yimtza Hashem, and it becomes clear, God willing, inyan zeh, this whole business, lefanenu, it coming up ahead, bimkomo, in its place, be'parshat kadoshim, so that in the book of Leviticus, we should live so long, right? We will see in the book of Leviticus where it talks about Orla and Revai, that this is applicable of how you actually practice this. So this idea of 1 day counting as an entire month, as a month counting as an entire year, we learn out from this. So going on. Let's go on. Okay. So let's take a look at this verse. This is verse 16. God says to Noah, "Say min hateva, go out of the ark, ata, you, v'ishtecha, and your wife, uvanecha, and your sons, uneshevanecha itach, and the wives of your sons with you." Now, you may recollect that when Noah is told to go into the ark, he's told to go in, him, his sons, his wife, and his son's wife go into the ark. Notice the difference in the ordering, and that's what we're going to look at. Ata ve'ishtecha. Ve'ilu beknisa kativ, he says, but when it came to going into the ark, it's written, this is chapter 6 of Genesis, verse 18, Uvata el hateva, and you shall come into the ark, ata uvanecha, you and your sons, ve'ishtecha, and your wife and your sons' wives, right? Melamed. So this tells you, Shebiyitziato, that when it came to coming out of the ark, Hutralo Tashmish Hamita. In that case, the um, uh, sorry, blocking on a word, right? That enjoying conjugal relations would be allowed once they got off the ark. We did discuss this in its place back in chapter 6, but the fact is that that subtle distinction of order is letting them know that conjugal relations would be permissible. Now, let's take a look. There's some interesting notes that Torah Temimah has on this. Uma dichtiv beyitzia be let's see. Besimon pe yud chet. Sorry. Simon Pasuk Yudchet. But we see later on when it came to going out of the ark, right? In verse 18, it says, "V'yatsa Noach uvanav ve'ishto." There it says Noah and his sons and his wife, etc. Let's take a quick look and see if I'm giving you the right. Here we go. Here it is. Vayetze Noach uvanav ve'ishto unashevanav ito. So Noah and his sons, his wife, and his wife's sons with him. So there it is. That's what he's referring to. And look at that. There it says Noah and his sons, right? So it's a little bit surprising. V'lo k'moshe amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It wasn't the way God had said to him, say v'gomer. He said, you go out. It was a command, right? Go, you and your wife, your son's and your son's wife. Ata v'ishtecha, you and your wife. Yesh more. So how do we resolve this? One can say, HaKadosh Baruch Hu lo higid lo ze bederech chiyuv, that when God said to Noah to go out with his wife and with his sons and his sons' wives, that the implication was that they could now enjoy conjugal relations, right? It wasn't an obligation. He wasn't giving Noah a mitzvah to do that Noah had to go out with his wife, etc., and that they were to engage in conjugal relations from that moment on. It wasn't an obligation. Rak bederech heter bereshut. What God was saying to him is, you now have permission to do that, to engage in conjugal relations. Okay. Klape ha'isur she'asar lo, and that was in relationship to the fact that he'd been forbidden before, right? B'knisato, when he went in lateva, into the ark. So in other words, this last statement that we're reading, right, where God was commanding Noah, was permission to say that previous prohibition has been lifted. Lasok priya berivia. In other words, to engage in conjugal relations and in conception, etc., raising children, right? In procreation, in other words, they were now allowed to go ahead and procreate. Let's go on. There's more to be said. Okay, so we understand. Kimavoar la'el, as it's explained, was explained above. This was chapter 6, verse 18. Uchamo kavanat halashon beparshat Yitro. It has the same intention and implication as in Parshat Yitro, in the Parsha of the Ten Commandments, right? Lech emor lahim, where God says to Moses, go and say to them, in other words, the Jewish people, shuvu lachem la'oholechem, go and return to your tents. So they were told beforehand that in the giving of the Torah, when they actually were going to be standing at Mount Sinai and receiving the Torah, they had to separate from their wives, right? Not engage 3 days before that event, right? And it was only after the Torah had been given that God says to Moses, to tell the Israelites they can go back to their tents, and that is a euphemism, meaning that they can go back and be intimate with their wives once again. Kefri hadrasha sham, it is according to the drush, the interpretation there, shehitir lahem derech eretz, that they were now allowed to go in normal relations with their spouses. Omna Noach, however, in this case that we're dealing with, Noah, lo ratza adain lihitasek bepriya berivia. Noah wasn't willing; he didn't want to engage in uh, reproduction. Right? Didn't want to. Ki haya yarei, why? Because he was afraid mechurban haolam, of the destruction of the world. Ad shehivtiach, he wasn't sure whether or not the world was going to get destroyed. Ad shehivtiach lo hakadosh baruch hu, until the Holy One, blessed be He, promised him al kiyum haolam, regarding the existence, the firm existence of the world, right? Kemoshe Katav Rashi, just as Rashi notes the Parsha Zu B'Samuch, in discussing this later on, right in this Parsha, right here alongside this. So we know that's another reason for the rainbow, right? That God showed him, that He made a covenant with Noah that the world would not be destroyed once again. V'gam yesh ra'aya, and there is a proof, you can find a proof, Dema'amar zeh shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that with regards to the statement that the Holy One, blessed be He, said, say, go out, etc., right, which is a command, right, sounds like a command, and we're saying it isn't a command that he must do it, they must engage in reproduction, right, but simply permission. Ata ve'ishtacha, you and your wife, who biderech reshut, that it was simply understood as permission, velo biderech tzirvui. God wasn't stating it as a commandment, as a command, right? Ki lefi hamavuar lekaman, because according to what is clarified later here, lekaman, later on, b'pasha emor, b'parsha, in the parsha, Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be He, said LeNoach, to Noah, Shtei pamim, twice, achar hamabul, after the flood, pru urvu. So it says later on in chapter 9, verse 1 and verse 7, God says to Noah twice, be fruitful and multiply, right? That they should procreate. Umevu arsham, and there it is clarified, the pam achat, that the first time God says to Noah, be fruitful and multiply, haya livracha, it was as a blessing, right? In other words, it was saying that he would be able to be fruitful and multiply. He was going to be able to do that. And that it was a blessed thing to do, right? That it was as a blessing. Vashniya letzivui, and the second time, as a commandment, that it is a command to be fruitful and multiply. Ayin Sham, he says, take a look there, Bepirush Rashi, in Rashi's explanation. Ve'isalka datach, and should you think, de lashon ze shelefanenu, that this language right here in our place that we're looking at now, se ata ve'ishtacha, where he says, go, you and your wife, hu letzivui, that it was in fact a command, al chiyuv priya verivia, regarding the obligation to procreate. Lo havale litzavot al ze od papam. Then why would God have to command him a second time, another time? Why? If here it was already a command, does God have to repeat the command? Ela vadai, but it is clear and certain that kan hayat chlit mamar, that here the intention of this statement, rak levitul haisur, was there just to remove, right, to remove the prohibition hakodem, the previous prohibition. V'hasheni, and the second time he is told, right, in that kind of word, livracha, it would be as a blessing. V'hashlishi letzivui, and the third time, there it would in fact be a command to procreate. So let's see if we want, yeah, okay. One more little section. The mishpachotehem yatsu. So let's take a look at your tit here. Kol hachaya, kol haremes, v'chol ha'of. So it's called all. This is in describing the going off the ark. All the beasts and all the creeping things, right? Yeah, v'chol ha'of, and all the birds, the winged animals. Kol aromes ala aretz, in everything that crept on the earth, lemishpachotehem, according to their families, yatsu minay teva, they went off the ark. They went out of the ark. Okay. So here he says, Amar Rabbi Chia no, sorry, here we go. Lemishpachotehem v'lo hem, meaning that their offspring, right, went off and not they themselves. They themselves. That is interesting, I must tell you, because for me it raises an issue, but I won't mention that for now. Okay? So in other words, what it's saying is that the animals that had come on board did not actually go off the ark. In fact, it was their offspring that went off the ark. So, lo nitpa'er inyan zeh. It says, this isn't clear. This matter is not clear. V'yafeh here agrav, and I think, and again, and he says the grav, who the grav was, I am not absolutely certain. After again doing research, I did not find this in my book that I had available to me of abbreviations, but I'm going to guess that it stands for Hagaon Rabbi Bechaya. There was a commentator by Rabbi Bechaya who commented on the Torah, and he cited in many cases, and that this is what he's referring to. Of course, Resh Beit, the abbreviation Resh Beit, honestly could stand for a number of different rabbis. For example, when it's just Resh Beit generally, like if you're studying Mishnah, it would refer to Bertanora, okay, who's a major commentator of the Mishnah. But here, since we're talking about the Torah, I'm going to guess that he's referring to Bechaya, right? So he says, he explained beautifully, Deyesh lekaven kavanat hadrasha hazot, that one should basically understand the intention of this interpretation, right? One should connect it, Amar Chazal, to a statement that our sages of blessed memory said, Bechulin, in the tractate Chulin, page 58a. Here we go. Here's the statement. Kol bria she'ein ba etzem eina chaya yud bet chodesh. That any animal, any creature that doesn't have a bone doesn't live for 12 months. It lives for less than 12 months. It cannot survive. Now, whether that is scientifically true or not isn't the issue here. The issue is that this is a principle that is understood. So, for example, essentially, we're talking about insects and very, very small, creatures that don't, like slugs and snails and things like that. They do not have a bone, and that they do not live for more than 12 months. They don't. ואחרי שהמבול היה שוהה י' בית חודש, right, or shoheh, and since the length of the flood was in fact 12 months, כפי שמורה החשבון בפרשה, as we can see from the counting, the chronology in this parsha, that the flood lasted 12 months. In Cain, if that is the case, hayu briot ka'ele, that these kind of creatures, shirak toldotehem yatsu velohem, that only their offspring went out and not they themselves. So in other words, they didn't survive the 12 months, and this is how they survived, right? That that what they had created came about. Now, the issue that I had, so that's who it's referring to. It's not referring to other creatures. It is essentially referring to those mishpachotehem. And we're talking about, let's take a look at it, right? So kol romes, right? Anything that crept on the earth. So we could say that that verse is actually referring to insects and things like that, creatures on that kind of level, right? Okay. And with that, we will finish for today. And if there are any comments or questions, of course, I'll be very happy to hear what you have to say. So I'm going to pause a second. I'm going to mark our place for next time and stop the share. Okay. Any comments before I stop the recording?
Oh, I was wondering about when um, um, Noah went into the ark. The world was being destroyed, so God said, you know, Noah didn't want to have intercourse with his wives because the world was being destroyed. It's when he left the ark after the world was destroyed
Yes.
that God said, "Go ahead and
Correct.
conject." You know, uh,
Correct.
okay. So the same way with at Mount Sinai, when the women were God said, make sure that everyone was pure and not impure when you come to the mountain.
Right.
So you can't have intercourse and it won't be pure. So that's why the women and the men didn't have intercourse when they went to the mountain to get the Torah.
Right. Correct.
Okay, all right. Well, what I can understand was um, the trees. I understood this part where you have to wait 3 months before you can eat the fruit off the tree. I imagine the fruit takes a long time to ripen, but I couldn't understand the one day is a year, and it just confuses me so much. I understand what you're talking about on Shiva, but I can't understand. It's too complex for me on that day. So one month is a year, 30 days, and then one day is a month. It's it really confuses me. I don't know.
So what it's
My
saying
mind
is,
doesn't.
I understand. I understand. What it's saying is that when you're counting, if I can possibly explain it, I'm not sure if I can do a good job, but I'll try. What
Okay.
it's saying is where you have to count the number of years, right? It doesn't, and it says, it has to be 4 years. And the year starts at a certain point. The example I thought it was going to refer to was actually Tu B'Shvat, because what do you consider the first year of a tree's life, quote, quote? Well, the answer is that if you planted that tree more than 30 days or 30 days or more before Tu B'Shvat, that is considered the first year in the life of the tree.
Oh,
There the significance is that they figure it takes, I believe, 30 days for the tree to root itself sufficiently. And so that's another issue. But the fact that you planted it more than 30 days before Tu B'Shvat, and you have to count the number of years for, let's say, other kinds of tithing and stuff, or whatever regarding the tree. Halacha is referring to the tree, and it is based on the number of years of the age of the tree. That first 30 plus days counts as a year one in that counting.
oh,
You
I
don't
see.
have to wait for the entire year. Just as with Shiva, part of a day counts as an entire day. What do you consider first day of Shiva, even though it's not 24 hours? Okay? So that's what it's referring to here, that when you're counting the number of years, part of a year can count as an entire year, all the way down to a month. So 1 month of that year counts as the first year.
Wonderful. Yeah, I
I
understand
hope
that.
that helps. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Uh, the insects that don't have bones can
Correct. Yeah.
live for a year. Okay.
That's a whole
There.
different subject. Okay, so Harlan, you understand that's a whole different subject now. We took a whole different new subject.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that's I'm trying to figure out this one too.
Okay. All right.
The lions and the elephants, they did
They have
have
bones, so they could go off. They
they
didn't.
can go off by
They
themselves.
themselves went off. Okay.
The others
Rem-
die
Yes.
on the. I see.
So the difficulty I was having, Harlan, the difficulty I was having is that just as Noah and his wife and his sons and his sons' wives were prohibited from procreation while on board the ark for that year, it says so were the animals. Well, if the animals weren't able to procreate, how could we talk about their offspring going off the ark as opposed
Yeah,
to
that's
Okay,
true.
so the answer is this, that when it comes to those kinds of invertebrates, okay, that we're talking about, you can't really talk about them having, quote, procreation, okay, in the same sense that one can animals that have vertebrae, okay, that or rather, I should say, that have bones. So
Hmm.
so that's how you resolve it. That the answer that we saw in the Torah Temimah, where I believe he's quoting or basing his answer on what Rabbi Bachaya says, is the fact that when it was referring to the families coming off the ark, right? It was referring to those animals that wouldn't have survived the year. That the prohibition of reproduction only applied to the lions and the human beings and the other animals that are, that have bone structures.
Oh,
It's not a universal statement. Okay. And that's how we have to understand it. But
but you said about Noah
yes,
uh, when he got off the ark,
yes.
he didn't want to procreate
He did not want at the time. Correct.
because he was afraid the world was going to be destroyed again.
Correct. Correct. That to have children in a world which is going to be destroyed doesn't make sense.
Oh,
They're all going to just be wiped out again. Why go through the effort? You
and
know,
that's why God had to
you
repeat it
don't,
twice.
right. Yes, that's why God had to make a covenant that he would not do that again. Right. Does a person really want to bring children in the world who are going to suffer and get killed and et cetera, et cetera? You want your children to be able to thrive, at least potentially. You want them to be able to. Yes.
Mm,
Okay. I'm
okay.
going to stop the recording.